All right, folks, welcome back to the Effin' Good podcast.
The Effin' Good podcast, hosted by myself, Brett, and my co-host, Ken Eiselhart.
How you doing, folks?
I almost forgot your name there.
Yep.
So today is we're doing our first album review.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing our first album review, and I think that we're going to be doing a lot more of these. We have categories set up. It's a lot of fun.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah. So,
and I love your shirt.
Thank you.
Brett's got...
everyone thinks it's goofy, but it's Pluto.
For everyone, listening, it is Pluto. He's wearing a cowboy hat, what appears to be a sheriff's star, and a bandana.
Yeah, he's a sheriff. It's Sheriff Pluto.
Okay. That's
without
necessary.
Without further ado,
let's get into it.
I want you to come on down, sweet Virginia.
Woo!
I've been waiting to do that. So we're doing Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones, released on May 12th, 1972, and let's get into it. So I feel like my first thoughts, I'll start it off. I feel like by this time the Rolling Stones had become really like the rock band from hell that people had previously sort of labeled them as, publications, the police, all that kind of stuff. Before, it was a little bit more innocent, and now they're like really these outlaws, literally like outlaws actually.
Yeah, so they're outlawed. They're coming off of some controversy, the drug busts, Brian Wilson's death.
Brian Jones'
death, his drowning.
Suspicious.
Yes, and then they spend all of their money that they owe in taxes. They spend it on stuff, I don't know what.
Let's take a guess here.
Yeah. So then they have to get out of Great Britain.
Yeah. So like it was sort of, I think that a lot of it was the taxes for sure, but I imagine that England wouldn't have been like, get out of our country if it hadn't been like this drug influence that they were carrying along with them.
Yeah.
People were still very much afraid of the public influence that the Rolling Stones had on the youth.
For sure. And at this point in 72, the drugs in that band had gotten pretty heavy. The heroin use was pretty heavy.
Definitely.
And they're also coming off of Altamont in 69. Yeah. So they're outlaws at this point.
They're outlaws, and they have a lot of darkness behind them too. I mean, like, people are just kind of like dropping dead or like near dropping dead around them.
Yeah.
Getting arrested, all that kind of stuff. So they were this album is really telling. The album process, at least, is really telling of all of that.
Oh, yeah. So they decide, we got to get out of here. Keith Richards buys a villa in the south of France.
Yeah.
In Nice, I believe it's pronounced.
No, I thought it was Nelcote.
Well, in Nice, France.
Nice, France, yes.
Very nice.
Very nice. Yeah. So this album also was, it was really like an accumulation of a lot of their work that they had done, leading up to this. A song like Shine a Light had started being written in, I think, 1968. Those first lines are actually about Brian Jones. Mick Jagger sings, "Saw you stretched out in room 1009 with a smile on your face and a tear right in your eye. Oh, I couldn't see to get a line on you." That is about, Brian Jones just being strung out.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, a lot of the songs, like, we associate this album with Villeneuve, south of France, but the recording sessions were all over the place. Yeah. Really, it started out in England, and then the bulk of, like, the music takes place in France, but then after the fact, they go to remix it and add overdubs in LA. Yeah.
I think this might be a bold call for a lot of people, but I think that Exile on Main Street is really the last truly great Rolling Stones record.
Well, it's definitely, I think, the culmination of that period of them.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason I challenge you is Goat's Head Soup is a very good record.
I think it's a very good record, but I don't think, I think that it doesn't hold a candle to Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, or Exile on Main Street.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but it has like the same feeling.
No, it definitely has the same feeling.
The same attitude. It was also produced by the same guy. So Jimmy Miller
Yeah.
Started with them at the what was the first one? Beggar's Banquet in '68.
Beggar's Banquet in '68. Yeah.
Yeah, and he stuck with them through this period, adding musical, adding percussion, adding a bunch of different touches. But he was the producer on these albums up until Goat's Head Soup, and then
and also Goat's Head Soup. Actually, no, I think Mick Taylor was on the one after Goat's Head Soup. I think that was his last album with the Stones. Mick Taylor, I didn't realize was pretty was like hanging with Keith at this time. I always kind of had this image of him being like a little bit, he stood away from a lot of that stuff, but at this time he was really involved with, Keith's inner circle.
Oh yeah, I had a professor at Fordham, and he always said Mick Taylor went into the Stones a vegetarian and he came out a heroin addict.
That sounds like a good professor. I wish that I could have had them.
Yeah.
What did he teach?
He's a DJ at FUV, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So he taught like music or something?
He taught like rock history and that kind of thing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to teach rock history.
Yeah, and I forget his name right. It's Eric something, and he's a great guy, but...
It's cool that you know his first name.
Eric... We'll put it in there.
But yeah, so after Exile, I feel like the last like really good albums are Goat's Head Soup, Some Girls, and Tattoo You. I think those are like really solid records, and everything else, there's some good songs. Like I Know It's Only Rock and Roll is on like their 75 record, and it's good. But as an album, it doesn't have nearly like the completeness that a lot of these other Stones records have.
No, definitely not. The 80s was a tricky period for a lot of 70s bands, 60s, 70s bands, but the Stones especially.
No,
just
definitely.
Look at the album art from that time. It's
weird. It's very Warholian, a lot of it.
Yeah, I guess. At its best.
Yeah.
But like they just don't know where to go, and
that was like that led to them kind of having a bit of a hiatus in like the late 80s, early 90s when Keith put out those solo records, when Mick Jagger gave his shot at a solo record. I'm more of a Keith solo guy than a Mick solo guy.
Yeah, I'm more of a Wyman solo guy.
Yeah, you're a Wyman solo guy. So the 80s were that's an interesting topic in and of itself. Just like these like artists from this time transferring into the 80s because it was contrasting in such a heavy way.
Yeah, who did it great? Leonard Cohen did it so well.
Well, Leonard Cohen. Yeah, well, I was gonna compare him to Bob Dylan, but Bob Dylan also had an interesting age.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, some good and some bad. But I think Leonard Cohen, like from the songs of Leonard Cohen to like First We Take Manhattan.
Yeah,
it's so interesting.
Well, he had a really cool like adaptation to the production of that time.
Yeah,
that he and it's a testament to his like skill as an artist and a songwriter that he could like just seamlessly mold himself into like that 80s like crisp production.
Yeah, it's not easy to do. I mean, and this is kind of what the Stones are one of those bands they go through a lot of transformations. Similar to Pink Floyd losing Syd Barrett, there's a bit of an awkward phase in between albums, and then you get the Waters Gilmour dynamic. Yeah, with Dark Side, and then it transitions into like a Gilmour thing. So here you have the band transitioning from the Brian Jones heavily dominated like the what's it called?
Creative vision.
Well, and the Eastern influence, the psychedelia, and now it's more of the Jagger, Richards era.
Well, in a funny way, I think that the Rolling Stones with Brian Jones were probably more instrumentally like adept and inclined to experiment and stuff like that, because Brian Jones was really leading, like, playing the sitar, playing the marimba, doing like all of these like auxiliary production things that you hear on like Buttons to Buttons, I think is the album. And a lot of those other albums that are a lot more experimental, and like the 67 album for Your Satanic Majesty's Request. Yeah. A lot of that kind of stuff. So without Brian Jones, they were actually limited in a way with how they could play instruments. I mean, they had, guys like Jimmy Miller as a producer, and, Bobby Keys and Jim Price, great trumpet player. Yeah. But it was more in the root of like jazz and rock and roll. And it didn't have this kind of experimentation that that you sort of saw them leaning into as the 60s were going on, and then Brian Jones just got really addicted to drugs and had no kind of work ethic from what it seems, and it just didn't go anywhere, and then he died.
Yeah, I think that this is where they lean into rock and roll and blues
Definitely.
and everything, and I love that. This is like my favorite era of Stones. I think this is when I think of the Stones. I think of this period of them.
Yeah.
And not so much, the earlier Brit pop kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, in a way,
Invasion.
and I think that this is a lot of hindsight, but like I think that the Beatles breaking up really allowed the Stones to be the Stones in a way, and then also this Exile on Main Street was the first album that they did without Alan Klein as their manager.
Yeah, so that's another thing. They were trying to get a few of these songs. I think were written under the contract with him, and they were really trying to get out of that contract.
Yeah, well, Alan Klein, at this point, like 1972, was kind of known to be like, I have him written down as like this like Harvey Weinstein type of figure, maybe without the sex crimes and stuff like that we know of.
Just good movies.
But he was really like this guy that could like that could and would just like move mountains.
Yeah.
To help the artist, sure, but like long term really like help his corporation, stuff his pockets.
Sure.
There's a lot of really ugly stories about Alan Klein with Sam Cooke in the 60s, which was sort of who he got his start with, and how like up until I think it was 5 years ago, Alan Klein's son, who like took over Alan Klein's business, gave the royalties and residuals to Sam Cooke's family because Alan Klein had withheld it for all that time from his family, and like took royalties from people, took huge percentages from George Harrison and John Lennon, and did that with Brown Sugar and like Wild Horses too from Sticky Fingers.
Wow.
For a long time, and had like the Stones, like that's where the Stones' money was also going, not just drugs, but Alan Klein.
True. Yeah, so then they knew they could write an album, but they needed money, and they needed to write an album to get money. They needed to put the album out. So then, hence,
it's a tale as old as time.
A tale as old as time. So here we find ourselves south of France in the middle of the summer.
Woo.
We're at this villa, which is gorgeous. The photos from this period are my favorite ever. Like this era is it's such legendary rock and roll shit.
Yeah, well, I can't remember his name, but in that documentary, Stones in Exile, they had this French photographer who had shot them like previously a lot, come with them to France, and he was like saying, the lighting in the south of France is so beautiful, and so I think that a lot of these a lot of these pictures that we're talking about are by this photographer. I wish I had written down his name because those are really with Keith with his big sunglasses.
Yeah, just they're playing guitar in like the giant kitchen.
Yeah,
and just sitting there like after dinner and just smoking, drinking wine.
Yeah. And I don't know about you. I know that we have different habits sometimes, but I think that this is like an album and a tour that I would have loved to experience for like 2, 3, max 5 nights of. Like max.
Yeah.
I think that that's all depending on how the rest of it goes, but I would love to experience like a glimpse of it.
You want to see it. You want to be a fly on the wall.
Oh yeah.
Villanelle coat. Yeah, they said everyone started to live like Keith for that period.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious because usually the band is doing drugs, and that's fine, but you can't have like your producers and your engineers also doing drugs.
No,
so like everyone's just doing drugs. The guys in the recording van are doing drugs. It's just
Charlie Watts said a lot of Exile was done how Keith works.
Yeah. I have actually a good quote of that, and so this is kind of famously one of Mick's not too fond of it. He doesn't get why people like it so much.
I think that's him not loving how the vocals were produced a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe the process of it a little bit too.
And he was also upset with the rock and roll aspect of it. He has a quote where he says that he wanted to experiment more, or he at that point he was more into experimenting.
Interesting.
So yeah, he was like, "There's a lot in rock and roll, and I love that, but I want to experiment."
Yeah, well, I could have seen him doing like some like Bowie-esque stuff, you know, and getting more into the glam rock, because you can see it in their and in all of their sort of appearances, what they would wear, especially Mick, obviously, what they would wear on stage.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like dressing like the New York Dolls in a way.
Yeah.
But there's I mean, and I think that the music is very similar to the New York Dolls, a little bit less punk, but I think that I could see him getting into the production of like something like Ziggy Stardust and, you know, those 70s Bowie albums.
Sure. Which also, so Ziggy Stardust came out in 72 as well.
Yeah, or 72 or 73?
72.
72, yeah.
But this quote I have, so this is from Keith Richards. "Mick needs to know what he's going to do tomorrow," says Richards, his voice slurring into a laugh. "Me, I'm just happy to wake up and see who's hanging around. Mick's rock, I'm roll."
I saw that part of the quote, and I think that's true.
That sums it up.
Yeah, that just about sums it up. This, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this is the first single that Keith had on lead vocals.
It sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, and
was it Happy?
It was Happy.
Yeah.
So go Keith.
Yeah, and he kills it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, it's a great Keith album. There's a lot of great Keith songs on there.
Oh, and this was where, like, I feel like when I think of like the Rolling Stones riffs and like their rhythms, this is like the album that I go to, because it's so, like, obviously the album ranges a lot, but it's so singular. And I think the singularity of it is Keith's influence going all the way through it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so instrumentally, as well as the Rolling Stones, obviously, we mentioned Jimmy Miller. We've got Ian Stewart, who was their pianist for, you know, I think like almost ever. And then Bobby Keys on the saxophone.
Yeah.
Nicky Hopkins on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And Jim Price, who is like their, I don't know if he played more brass than just the trumpet, but he was the one playing trumpet. And so like they really, and these guys are like they were in the shadows of the Rolling Stones' greatness. Like when you listen to those Rolling Stones songs, they are in a lot of ways the sound.
Yeah, Bobby Keys, Nicky Hopkins, these guys are huge. Huge. All the guys you mentioned. And then this session it's kind of like a White Album-ish. You know, you don't know it's whoever's showing up that day is going to be on a track. Like I showed you before, there's I guess one day it was Jimmy Miller hanging out, and I guess he had a song that he wanted to play, and Graham Parsons, who was hanging around there all the time, he was playing guitar, he was on backups, Keith is on backups, and it's this little country jam. But they were rolling that day, they probably woke up at whatever hour and just, you know.
Well, so something that's really shocking to me, and this just kind of shows like what kind of a person Keith Richards is apparently while they were in Nice, he would be waking up at like 8:30 in the morning every day, because he had his son Marlon, who was like 1 or 2 or something like that, and Anita with him. And so he would wake up like at the crack of dawn, basically, hang out with them, you know, like soberly, I guess, you know, maybe some drinks and cigarettes and stuff like that, but
relatively
sober stuff with them and hanging out. And what I imagine is that he was kind of like sleeping throughout the day a little bit,
probably.
And then at night, Anita would take Marlon, and he would just go record from 8 to 3 in the morning. Yeah. In that like basement studio that they had.
Yeah. So this is also the period of the Stones where they're a little bit older. They start to shock up.
Yeah.
You know, so Mick marries Bianca.
Yeah, she's pregnant at this time.
Yeah. Keith is with Anita Pallenberg. Anita and Mick have a little bit of a fling here at the Villanelle Coat, and
they've had but they've been together for a long time, because part of the beef with Brian Jones originally was that Anita was originally with Brian Jones, and then Anita left Brian for Keith, which caused a big division in the band, and I think sort of like was a big catalyst for Brian Jones's demise and downfall.
And then she's going on to Mick.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
She has a little fling.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And I saw something about how like Keith would be strung out and Mick would be having sex with her.
Yeah. Good times.
And he got married to Bianca like at this time also.
Yeah. It's a day in the life of a Rolling Stone.
Day in the life of a Rolling Stone, yeah. So how would you review this album, and what does it mean to you now, and what did it mean to you when you first heard it?
I mean, I love this album. I think, honestly, when I first heard it, I downloaded it illegally off the internet. I had a bunch of tracks, and there was so many of them, and not necessarily packaged in an order that I was not a huge fan. So it wasn't until later that I would listen to it kind of as one piece that I really started to appreciate it. But I love this record. I think it's so epitomizes rock and roll. Like, it is the statement on it. It's got everything. It's got blues, it's got rock, it's got folk, it's got country. And it just sounds like a party, like through and through.
No, that is exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like a party. And I think that this for me was the album that like showed me that I really love the Rolling Stones. It wasn't just like, you know, the few songs that I had always loved, but that there was like this depth that I discovered with the Rolling Stones where I was like, oh wow, like, yeah, like I can go through albums of the Rolling Stones that aren't just Sticky Fingers, because that was really the album that I listened to. But then when I had listened to Exile, because actually the first time that I think I listened to Exile all the way through, my parents went to London on vacation or something like that, and they got me the remastering of Exile.
Oh, and that was 2010, I think.
It was 2010. I think they got it a couple of years later, but it plays beautifully to this day, and it really, like a song like Rocks.
That's this one right here.
Yeah, that's that one right there. And a song like Rocks Off, like I hadn't heard it, and it's the first song on the album, and I was immediately just hooked into it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
So we talked a little bit about the green room, which I like to call, which is kind of like our behind the scenes research of what went into this album.
We're stepping into the green room.
Going backstage. So this was their first album without Alan Klein, and I just kind of want to talk a little bit of shit about Alan Klein.
Fuck Alan Klein.
I
don't care what he says.
So he had just briefly managed the Beatles for a little bit, simultaneously with the Rolling Stones, which, like, you have to realize as just a human being is like an impossible feat. It's like being the president of the United States and like Vladimir Putin. Like you can't do both jobs at the same time.
Yeah, they're very different. Public perception alone,
and just the workload that goes into it, you can't do it. I think
as a manager. Person. The idea of a manager is some guy who's just gonna take on every job he can do. Yeah. And like he's gonna miss so many calls and shit. But like he's like, yeah, I can manage your, like he wants to be as big as possible.
Yeah, and at this time also, I think it was actually this year, John Lennon and George Harrison dropped him as their manager because because the way that the Beatles broke up,
freed up his calendar.
It freed up his calendar a little bit, yeah. But the way that the Beatles breaking up sort of worked in regards to Alan Klein was they were looking for a new manager in like 69, 70, and Paul McCartney wanted Linda Eastman's father, who was like a very prominent lawyer, to sort of manage their finances and all that kind of stuff. And the other three, I'd imagine really more George and John. I feel like Ringo was probably just a little bit, whatever. But they probably, thinking like, well, this is a little bit of a bias from Paul saying that his wife's father should be our financial manager, so we'd rather go with Alan Klein. And so he got outvoted 3-1 on that. Alan Klein became the manager. And I can't remember exactly what happened during the making of Let It Be and all that kind of stuff that happened, but a lot of the finance problems that the Beatles would have after breaking up was because of Alan Klein, and which led to a lot of their like beef with like Apple and stuff like that. I think actually Alan Klein's corporation might have bought Apple at that point. And
so he owned a lot of the catalog, I guess.
He owned a lot of the catalog, and kind of wouldn't give it up, and he went to prison in like 1977 or something like that.
Really?
Yeah. So he's like a bad dude.
How do they treat record producers in prison, you think?
It's a good question, actually.
Like, I wonder if that's looked upon as like a bad crime or just
Yeah, everyone's probably just trying to get a demo recorded by this guy.
He goes to Charles Manson's prison.
He goes to Charles Manson, and Charles Manson's like, finally, you sent me someone I can use.
But no, not Alan Klein.
I don't want Alan Klein. Yeah. So, and obviously we talked about this a little bit, but I think that we should really just emphasize that literally tons of heroin went into making this album.
Yeah, I think that the house was a studio / villa / drug den. Like thousands of pounds of marijuana and heroin were just being filtered through this house in the south of France.
And we talked about Graham Parsons. Eventually, Graham Parsons was asked to leave.
Yeah.
Because Graham Parsons also came from a trust fund, and so there was never a shortage of drugs if he was there, because he could always kind of just dip into this little trust fund and just buy like all the heroin and morphine he wanted.
Sure. So yeah, there's that. There's also the idea that Graham Parsons and Keith Richards were super close at this time.
Yeah.
And we already said that, you know, this album is very much a Keith album. And so Mick Jagger maybe felt a little edged out by this whole relationship. There's even talks that Keith Richards and Graham Parsons might go on a tour, like with a little solo project or something.
That would have gone terribly.
I don't know. It would have been cool.
I think that they would have quit after. There would have been like 3 shows, and one of them they wouldn't have shown up for, and then after that one it would have been over.
It would have been awesome. Someone probably goes up to them, Graham Parsons, like in the morning, be like, "Hey, buddy, you know."
It was Keith. Keith had to ask him to leave.
It was Keith?
Yeah, it was Keith. And I think that a lot of it was like kind of Mick being like, if this guy's staying, like
it's either he goes or I go.
That's a good Mick impression.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was like a little bit generic British, but
hey,
you had the that was Australian what I just did. So Keith had to ask him to leave. Interestingly, the drugs created this funny like this team situation in the house, and it was kind of like it was Keith, Jimmy Miller, Mick Taylor, and like kind of everybody else there.
It's whoever's
Nicky
up.
Hopkins, Bobby Keys, but then the people that sort of abstained from it.
Yeah,
I bet you could guess. Wyman, Watts, and Jagger. Yep.
Yeah.
So it was like the 3 of them were like
the 3 dorks.
The 3 dorks, the 3 squares. Yeah.
Although I'm sure them not joining in would be still a lot of drug use for a regular person. Like, you can't tell me that Mick Jagger was doing no drugs. I really doubt that claim.
Well, the thing is with Mick Jagger is that and you see it even now. He's
so fit.
He's so fit. He's so regimented.
True.
Like, he wouldn't let something like that. Like, I'm sure that, maybe he like had tried heroin or something like that. Yeah. But I think that he had way too much discipline as a performer and had way too much like dedication to what he was doing to like fuck himself up like that. You never saw Mick Jagger get up on stage strung out like Iggy Pop or something.
Yeah, no, I guess he had to be the front man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so eventually, while in the south of France, the French police got wind of this debauchery and everything like that, and basically closed in on them. And then the Rolling Stones the reason that they went to America ultimately was sort of because they were exiled from France.
Yeah. Well, because they're not really being inconspicuous.
No.
They're playing music really loud at night in the south of France, which is populated by like just probably rich people and just quiet French people.
Yeah.
And there's all these characters, these like drug dealers coming in and out of the house, these rock and roll stars just coming in and out at any given time. So the police start closing in, and eventually they are asked to leave France.
Yeah. And then so in America they finish it up with overdubs. They record like lead vocals, and I think that the bulk of it was probably done in Nice, but then they kind of added the essential things that needed to make an album sound like an album in LA. Yeah,
I bet it was a lot of like, they got the tapes back and it's like, holy shit, because I bet there was a lot of material and a lot of sifting through it.
Definitely.
Because they're just pressing record, they're all on heroin.
Yeah.
And then you get back, you had the vocals, guitar overdubs.
Yeah.
I think that was a big, and I think that was mainly Mick too at that point.
Yeah.
Doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I was reading that when they went back to L.A., like Keith had the wheel in France, and things went the way that they did, and then when they got to L.A., like immediately Mick Jagger just like took charge and like finished it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then from there they go on their tour, which was originally titled the American 72 Tour, which then got dubbed STP, the Stones Touring Party.
Stones Touring Party.
Yeah.
Or known as the Cocaine and Tequila Sunrise Tour.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
That's
that.
what Keith called it in his book. Dude, and that tour
great.
is the stuff of legends.
No, it really is. And like I said, I think that I would love... on tour, I think I could do 2 nights of it.
Yeah.
But after that, I think that I would become a zombie.
Dude, that's their first time in the States after Altamont.
That's crazy.
And they come and they start fucking shit up. To give you an idea of what they're doing, I mean, like, Steven Stills and Keith Richards get in a fight.
I've got that.
They pull knives on each other.
Who do you think would have won in that?
I don't think either of them would have done it.
Weirdly enough, I've got my money on Steven Stills.
Stills, yeah.
Dude.
Keith Richards is like, I don't think he knows. I think he knows how to wield a knife or take one out. I don't know if he knows how to use it.
Yeah, I don't, and you know.
Although there's that legendary video of that guy getting on stage when the Stones are performing, and Keith just taking a giant swing at him with his Telecaster.
It's actually one of my favorite videos of all time because it's not even like he's like pushing him away. He actually like swings it like an axe.
Yeah, and you see Mick running away with a cape.
I think it's an American flag, actually.
Yeah. So that's happening. They're staying at the Playboy Mansion.
Yeah.
Their tour van gets blown up in Montreal. Someone puts a bomb in their instrument van.
Wow.
And yeah, it blows it up. Jagger and Richards go to jail because they get in a fight with a photographer. I mean, this tour is like everything that you associate with rock and roll.
No, like seriously. And Truman Capote also was sent by Rolling Stone to cover the tour.
Yeah.
Abandoned the tour in New Orleans.
He wasn't a fan of them, I don't think.
And they were not a fan of him, especially Keith was not a fan of Capote.
What a surprise. The guy who wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's was not
Yeah, no. I don't know what they were thinking. Well, so what the band's publicist said, which is interesting, is they said, this is when rock and roll and cultural society converged, or at least tried.
Yeah.
And
this is rock and roll is the biggest thing right now.
Rock and roll is the biggest thing. Led Zeppelin is like the #1 band in the world.
Yeah, and it's still like coming off of the 60s, so it's not even just the music of it. It's still like a consciousness kind of thing, like a change of consciousness kind of thing that they're seeing. So all the intellectuals are gathering there. They finish up with a couple nights at MSG, and they throw a party at St. Regis Hotel in Midtown.
Damn.
Warhol's there, Dylan's there, Capote,
John Lennon, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's like everyone's converging on this 1972 tour.
There's this really funny story of Capote. So like after a little while, Keith basically just started tormenting him.
Yeah.
And like pulling pranks on it.
Your book's nerd.
Like kind of like behaving like that. But there was this one night when he knocked on Capote's room and was like, "Come out, Truman, like come party with us, see like what a rock and roll band is really like." And Truman was like, "I wish that I could do like I wish we had Philip Seymour Hoffman right now
Truman Capote
to do the Truman Capote."
High pitched.
But he said, "I know what a rock and roll band is like, Keith.
I know what a rock and roll band."
and Keith was like, "Come on," and he couldn't get him out. But apparently, while Keith was doing this, he had a burger and ketchup in his hand, waiting for Capote to open the door so he could just throw it in his face. But Capote never opened the door, so he just threw it all over his door.
Yeah, I mean, and that's such a classic joke. Who hasn't been there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic situation.
It's just hazing.
Yeah.
So wait, this tour. This is what you're seeing on this tour. You're seeing like Mick Taylor Stones. Mick Taylor's like my favorite guitarist of the Stones. Like he's so melodic. His playing live is incredible. He's so smooth.
The slide on All Down the Line.
Yeah. So you're getting like a regular set would be like Brown Sugar, Bitch, Rocks Off, Gimme Shelter. Happy, Tumbling Dice, and that's just the first 6 songs. But
Then
they're closing with like Jumping Jack Flash and Street Fighting Man.
And it's
Rip This Joint into Jumpin' Jack Flash is crazy.
That's
so cool.
And everything is played like twice as fast.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, and it's really cool to think about, like, you know, these stones that hadn't been written with Mick Taylor are now being played with Mick Taylor. So there's this completely different sound that's coming out of them. It's much less like rooted in, like, you know, classic rhythm and blues, and really has this like up-tempo, fast rock and roll sound with this like just screeching slide guitar.
Yeah, it's insane. So, and then also on this, so there's people documenting this tour, so you could watch it. Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. That's
I can't recommend it enough.
It's peak Stones. There's a film that never came out by Frank. He's the guy who did the photo of the album art. Robert Frank. Cocksucker Blues.
Wow.
So it's just in like cinema verite, like documentary style, and the band deemed it embarrassing, potentially incriminating, and so they didn't want it to come out. It's been shown. It's had limited theatrical runs.
Wow, yeah. Really? I hope that they do. I would love nothing more than to see that.
Yeah, it's it's supposed to be wild, I guess, but yeah,
they'll release it when they die.
Yeah. So, but Robert Frank, he did the album art, which you're seeing right there. Incredible album art.
I think that he might be the photographer that I was talking about.
It could be him.
Because he did some of their other album photography.
So Robert Frank, I know him from, he did this book called The Americans.
Yeah.
He's a photo journalist, I guess, a photographer. And it's basically him going around in the 50s, going around America and just photographing everything. The intro of that book was by Jack Kerouac. Mm-hmm. So it's this real celebration and expose of American life in that time and rock and roll, think just Americana, that kind of thing.
Totally.
So he's this huge American figure, which I think really plays into this album and this band, that influence of Americana and blues and rock and all of that.
Yeah.
Also related to that album, the album art, because it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's really cool. I mean, the album art in a way is kind of like this documentary on a piece of paper, you know?
So it's actually, it looks like a collage from the front. It's actually a photograph of a wall of a tattoo parlor on Route 66.
Huh.
Yeah. So it's got all these circus freaks and everything.
Yeah.
And then it's got, of course, the writing. And John Lydon, actually, of the Sex Pistols, said it's
Johnny Rotten.
Yeah, it set the image of punk. He said that was a big inspiration, I guess, on what he was doing.
No, this album is very punk.
Oh, it's
It's just loose. It's like it's not polished. It's not pretty, but it's fucking. It rips.
It's torn and frayed.
Yeah, it's torn and frayed.
Yeah, and I think there's so many points of the album, like thematically, and just with Keith Richards, like. That's the vibe. Yeah. It is, this guitar is old, but it still plays, as long as the guitar still plays.
I think this is a good transition into our category of cultural impact. How do you feel, or do you have any, maybe references in mind for this album? I mean, something that immediately comes to mind for me all the time is when I watch The Departed. There's a great scene when Jack Nicholson is interrogating Leonardo DiCaprio, and he takes him into the back room. Leo's got the cast on, and he's smacking him over the arm with the boot.
You're gonna stop doing drug deals with your jerk-off cousin?
And Let It Loose is playing, which is like a really weird song, I feel like, because it's like this calm song. It's slow.
Yeah.
But it's just playing softly over this whole scene, and like Leonardo DiCaprio is just like screaming his head off.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
If you watch that scene, you could see when he slams the boot down that he's not actually hitting his hand. You could see it hit the table.
Oh, yeah? In front of it. Yeah. Oh, well, there we go. You just ruined the movie for me.
No, it's hard not to hear the Stones and not think of any Scorsese-related
Absolutely.
project.
I mean, he's their number one fan.
Give Me Shelter 3 times. You couldn't pick another one?
Give Me Shelter. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, Tom Waits and the White Stripes both called this album specifically like huge influences on their careers. Tom Waits called it a tree of life.
Yeah, and it's.
And what do you think that means, a tree of life? I've got my own thoughts.
I think it means that you can go to this album and it's almost like source material.
Yeah.
Like, and it's amazing. Some of these aren't more like. Some of them are, I think, traditional like blues songs, but like if you were to make an album of all rock and roll, any band would do that. It would sound very one-dimensional, but this touches every part of rock and roll. Yeah, like it's got gospel, it's got country, it's got blues. It's really like it's the whole foundation. Yeah, and it's almost like it's very deep in that way. Like you could I don't know. You could take a lot from that.
Well, yeah, and like I think we sort of were talking about how it really and like in the way that it's an accumulation of all of the Stones' work. It really is this big buildup from like who they started out as to like who they are at the peak of their career. So yeah, they've got like Shine a Light, which is a gospel song. Then they've got like Shake Your Hips, which is like an old Slim Harpo song. Yeah. And they've got
Slim Harpo.
Slim Harpo actually is like, he slaps so hard. Yeah. If you want blues music that isn't like sad blues, listen to that, because it is...
He's the real Slim Shady.
He's the real Slim Shady. No, it's like party blues music from like the 50s. Yeah. So it's really cool. And yeah,
dude, that's the crazy thing. This album is as American as like Daisy Dukes and Apple Pie, and it was recorded in the south of France by a bunch of British fucks.
Yeah, who just wanted to be American.
Yeah,
so badly.
But this
badly that they pretended to be.
And we'll take them.
Yeah, we'll take them.
But this is why, if we get into that, and I don't want to get into this debate, but when people are like Beatles, Stones. I love the Stones because their source material is very American based, and it's very like, it's blues. Like that's what they're drawing from. Yeah. The Beatles weren't drawing so much from that.
They were drawing, like I think each of them had their influences. Chuck Berry was a big influence.
Well, at first they were all drawing from that.
Right. Yeah.
But Beatles going from like Sgt. Pepper on, that's like British music.
Yeah. No, that is. I mean, it's very similar to like a lot of the Kinks stuff.
And this is where you see the forks totally split. Like, everything in that British invasion is kind of here. Yeah. And then, Beatles, Kinks, Stones, they all go different.
Yeah, and then the Who kind of take like the hard rock.
Yeah, they go totally different.
Yeah, and the Who became big influences for like what would become like metal and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the punks too.
Yeah.
Introspection, like introspective lyrics.
Yeah. And
who am I?
Also,
who are you?
The Exile on Main Street as like a name became really influential. If you look it up, there's a lot of things called like Exile On, Exile In, and it's all, a lot of it comes from just the Stones influencing it. Yeah. A great album is Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville. It's a good like alternative rock power pop album from the 90s. I've
never heard it, but
it's good. It's good stuff.
Big ones.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just love to see Fish covering this at a Halloween show?
Just like funking it up, like funking and jamming, just like on tumbling dice. Oh my god, yeah. I don't listen to it. I wish I could imitate them, but I don't listen to enough Fish to really like recall.
I think Matchbox 20 also.
They have an album called Exile on Main Street, I think.
Yeah,
that's where
Is it covers?
Is coming to an end. Oh well, I guess we're gonna pretend. Let's see how far we've come. That song. I loved that song when I was like 8.
I don't know it.
Oh well.
Yeah.
It's a banger. No.
I don't know, but
Rob Thomas
recommended this. Rob Thomas, Matchbox 20. Sing a song. Shut up.
But yeah, so
Always Sunny.
Now moving on to a new category that is I take pleasure in this category, but it's the Joe Cocker with a little help from my friends cover song selection. So the idea of this is that you take a song from the album and you say who you would want to see cover it, who you think would do a good cover of it, and then how Joe Cocker would cover it. Yeah. So what do you have?
All right, I'm thinking Joe Cocker. He's dramatic, so you want to let him shine with something like that. So Sweet Virginia.
And who would you want to see covering?
Who would I want to see cover? Okay. Well, I had a different answer though.
Okay.
For that, so I was gonna say I think Nude Party could do a really good cover of some Exile kind of stuff.
Oh, definitely.
And because they have the personnel for it, they have a lot of different.
Got a lot of people.
Percussion, slide guitar.
For sure.
They could cover all those bases.
Yeah, definitely.
So them doing like Let It Loose or something, or like one of those slower ones.
Totally.
I'd love that.
So how would Joe Cocker cover Sweet Virginia? Let's hear it.
I want you to come on. Come on now. Sweet Virginia.
But the thing that people actually don't always credit Joe Cocker with is that he totally changes the arrangement of the song.
True, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, no, and I don't have the musical mind to like rearrange a song. But you want to hear what I picked?
Got?
I got Nick Cave covering "Shine a Light."
Ooh, that'd be good.
Right? Just like a ballad at the piano.
Totally.
And Joe Cocker, you know, just like, man, good Lord, shine a light on you. Yeah, I don't know how he would cover it.
You gotta get the hand in there, like he's doing something with the hand.
I don't know how he would arrange it though.
I don't either, but I know that he'd be screaming his voice off.
I don't know how he does that. Low-key British also.
Low key? Yeah, that is low key.
Yeah.
Joe Cocker. Cocker is an English name if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, but we've got a lot of English names here.
Name one.
Johnson.
I don't know about that.
But yeah, so now on to a more of a Debbie Downer bit of a category.
Yeah.
It's the skips. Do you have any skips?
I do have skips.
I have skips too.
Dude, I was trying to load up this, system to make the podcast, and I saw your skips. I peeked, and I'm disappointed in you. I'm disappointed.
On which one?
I mean, you tell me your skips.
I skip. I just want to see his face, and maybe Sweet Black. Well, what are your skips?
Bro,
I'm gonna be pissed.
I just want to see his face is one of the spookiest, most haunting tracks in the whole album.
Yeah, but it's a skip. I'm not gonna listen to it over and over again.
Why? You're afraid to see his face?
I think why is the question I should be asking you.
No. Listen, so they go to L.A. and they're very into gospel, and they see Aretha Franklin. She's recording at a gospel church.
Yeah.
So they're very inspired by that.
I thought that's where Shine a Light came from.
And this is where this whole gospel thing is coming from. And that song, sonically, is incredible. Like, I remember that's one of the ones when I first heard it, I couldn't even make sense of what it was because it's not a traditional song in any way that I've ever heard. It's not a rock song that you've ever heard.
Yeah. It's
almost like a whisper. The vocals are so far away.
Yeah.
And it's really spooky. Like, the production is strange.
So what is your skip?
Turd on the Run.
Turd on the Run. That's a great one.
That song sucks.
Come on.
Turd on the Run.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I must have just missed that. I must have skipped. I must have just completely missed my mind when I was going through it. Because you're right, Turn on the Run isn't great, but it's funny and it's about them. They're turds on the run.
Yeah,
they're on the run.
All right. Sweet Black Angel.
Touche.
Sweet Black Angel is a skip for me as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
It's a little dated.
Yeah, it's kind of boring.
It's Sweet Black Angel, not a Sweet Black Slave. I don't know. It's kind of like,
I didn't even pick that up, but yeah, you're
up upon my wall. She counted up the minutes.
Do you have any research on opinions of this at the time? Because this is a very mixed album.
It was very mixed at the time.
Yeah.
And Keith Richards said, like, they're gonna say that now, but like in 10 years they're gonna call it a fucking classic.
That's absolutely true. I mean, Jeffrey Cannon at The Guardian actually loved it and said it will go down as their classic album.
Yeah, I think it's either people saying this is amazing or people being like this,
Yeah.
What it. I don't think anyone's like this sucks, but it was like,
who hated it?
Who?
Lester Bangs.
Really?
Which is really typical of him because then I think 2 years later he walked it back and was like, actually, this album is fantastic, and I always thought this.
Yeah.
But it was kind of typical of Lester Bangs, hate on an album that's just fantastic, and then just walk it back immediately.
Yeah. No, I think. I had other opinions on that.
Well, Lenny Kaye, who would become the guitarist for the Patti Smith group, reviewed it for Rolling Stone and gave it a really favorable review, but had kind of the encapsulation of the mixed feelings about it at the time.
I think you could have criticisms with this album in terms of it's kind of
it's not much lyrical content. It's not
it's what you could like about it is the same thing you could dislike. There's a lot of songs that are kind of unfinished that just end in a jam, and they have a good verse and a good chorus, and then they kind of just jam out.
Yeah.
So if you don't like that, like it's not very polished like that. So if you don't like that, you're not gonna like it. If you like bands jamming and like
this is in no way a jam band.
No,
though.
it's a band
and
that jams.
Yeah, like let's they cut it off where it needs to be cut off. They don't self-indulge on it, I wouldn't say.
No, but
they indulge, but
it will end with like a blues jam kind of thing.
Yeah, but it won't be like there won't be 8 minutes of that.
No, definitely not. So I think and there's some songs that are really complete, and I think those were the ones that were mainly written before the session.
Yeah,
I think the ones that came out of the session were the more jammy or not complete songs, but I like Shine a Light, Let It Loose. Those ones came before. Those ones have bridges.
Tumbling Dice.
Yeah, they have bridges. They have like structure.
Yeah.
So I heard I was listening to some outtakes from the sessions, and I heard an early version of Shine a Light, and Jagger is singing Flash a Light. And I was so thankful that he changed it. Shine a Light is so much better.
Shine a Light is a lot better than Flash. Well, it also means different. Flash feels like a momentary, like something flashes.
Yeah. Shine
is it's continuous. It's a spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. But modern relevance is another category I've got. And so I said this before, but when I think of rock and roll music, like this is kind of the album that I think of in terms of like what rock and roll sounds like. It has the roots of rock and roll with Chuck Berry and rhythm and blues and everything like that, but takes it to this level that feels like people are still doing it today successfully. Bands like Twin Peaks, bands like the Nude Party, they're doing this, and when you stick to and it's so great because it goes to show that when you stick to a tradition of music and you do it authentically, it's timeless. But like the authentically is kind of it's the gray area of what is authentic and what is not, and what sounds dated and what sounds fresh, even though it has this traditional sound. Yeah,
totally. Just the amount of musicians who have been inspired by this album is like countless. Like you could name, from Tom Waits to like Ryan Adams. It just everyone can kind of draw from this because it's rock and roll.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if you listen to the Replacements' first album, they were kind of they were sort of like in between this scene of like hardcore punk and then being like just rock and rollers. And so that first album really shows that because they're basically what to me sounds like a sped up version of the Rolling Stones in a lot of ways.
In terms of drug intake and like
songs.
Replace heroin with meth and speed
with I don't know if they did speed, but just a lot of alcohol.
Replacements run speed.
Yeah. I could see that. But yeah, so you can really just go through all rock and roll and you hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you could probably even like look at some of the Strokes is very like intricate, but I feel like at its core, a lot of it has like an energy of Exile on Main Street. Maybe not the Rolling Stones, but Exile.
Yeah. Well, this band against the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rolling Stones, they created the template of like a rock band, really. Like in terms of like that outlaw, like we're a band of pirates, kind of. I just always, that's why this album's kind of legendary and the tour is legendary. Like you think of, the Gorillaz and they have like their characters and one of them looks like Keith Richards.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's like rock and roll myth.
Yeah, that's I think Damon Albarn's Gorillaz character is like the one that he's got the glasses and he's got the hair and he looks like really shadowy.
Yeah. No, I think the singer is David. That's the guitarist.
No, Damon Albarn is the singer for Gorillaz.
I know, but I'm saying in the fictional band Gorillaz, the one who looks like Keith is like a vampire guy. He's not the singer.
Oh, then maybe I'm thinking of another guy that kind of.
They're not real, so it doesn't matter.
Says you.
But they're just. It's weird. They're myths.
Yeah.
They're like living myths.
So what would you rate this out of 10?
I'm giving it. I think ratings are kind of dumb. I think it's an 8.2.
8.2. Surprised. I gave it a 9.
A 9. Well, I haven't ranked any albums, so like I didn't want to go 9.
Well,
I needed some room.
I think that the 1 point is enough to cover some skips and then maybe improve some songs slightly.
Sure. I think that's worth 1.8 points.
Maybe.
I'll be the tough judge.
All right. Yeah, I'll be the
You just
generous.
keep giving out your 9s.
Well, what is is this your top Stones album?
No.
What is?
Let It Bleed.
Let It Bleed, yeah?
Yeah, I love Let It Bleed.
I love Let It Bleed too, but
Yeah, I think the songs are better.
Yeah.
This one's got the energy that's so captivating.
Give Me Shelter.
Give Me Shelter, but yeah, Give Me Shelter's like
Can't always get what you want.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's my favorite one.
Fair enough. Maybe I was a little bit too easy on them.
I think you were.
And last category. If you like this, then you should listen to this.
I'm gonna go. There's so much you could say, but I think a good one for me, and I think they inspired a lot of this kind of stuff. AM by Wilco.
I've got AM too.
Yeah, specifically a song like Casino Queen.
Yep.
Just even hearing the bottles in the background, that captures the essence of that.
Totally.
And even thematically, just green felt and gambling. Yeah. Losing your money.
Passenger side, just drinking and driving.
Yeah. And that's what music's all about, really.
Drinking and driving. Yeah.
Do you have any other one?
I've got a bunch of others. Yeah. So I've got the Nude Party's Midnight Manor.
Yeah.
That's their second album. Their first album, to me, they're kind of like this band that is the Rolling Stones, the Velvet Underground, Bob Dylan, and then like Graham Parsons, because they really have, they're like the Rolling Stones with their country influence, but they lean into it more, like a lot more, to make them like what I feel like is like almost like a country band. Mm-hmm. So Midnight Manor, though, I think is their most Rolling Stones sounding album. Yeah,
is that the single they released too? What's the single they released from that album?
From that album,
it's like the first one.
Well, they released this song called "Lonely Heather," which sounds like "Let's Spend the Night Together" a lot of.
One of them reminds me of "Shine a Light" a lot.
Oh, they have a song on Midnight Manor that has a very similar title.
Yeah.
They have this one song called "The Cure Is You," and the only cure is you, and that really sounds like it could be a Rolling Stones song.
Yeah, I think it's "Shine Your Light." Actually.
"Shine Your Light," yes, that is what it's called.
So title, obviously, but like in terms of the instrumentation they have on there, whenever you have that clanging keyboard, that kind of like joyous thing.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. That like really that uplifting keyboard.
Yeah, someone just banging away on it.
Twin Peaks is "Down in Heaven."
Twin Peaks, yeah, that's a good example.
That's like I feel like a really Rolling Stones album for them.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned the Replacements, but Sorry Ma, Forgot to Take Out the Trash. It's definitely a lot more screaming and a lot faster. But if you can like get up to pace with that, then you can like feel the slowed downness of the rock and roll that's on it. I've got Drive By Truckers, A Blessing and a Curse.
Totally. Very
just like rock and roll with the country also. Wilco's AM. And then this isn't such a similar album, but I think that you have to listen to Graham Parsons. Yeah. So I've got Grievous Angel on here.
I was going to say GP, the 1973 one. Yeah. But yeah, any of that. I think his spirit is on this album. It's on Exile. It's all over it. Yeah. So yeah, you gotta give Graham Parsons a listen. Give Flying Burrito Brothers a listen.
Yeah. Give Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Yeah. That's such a great Birds album.
Graham Parsons,
legend. R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Is that a proper way to end this podcast, with saying R.I.P. to Graham Parsons?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Signing off.
All right. Until next time.
This is the Effin' Good Podcast. Keep on rocking in the free world.